So to make sure that I understand this, then John Lash has been saying that the Nag Hammadi Gnostics saw those people at Qumran and the Dead Sea Scrolls looking back into the tradition and saw those people as having been influenced by a malevolent ET or perhaps even just perceiving that they were. But that begs the question. So were the people at Nag Hammadi, did they have any extraterrestrial contact?
Yes, but they were not influenced. The people who left the Nag Hammadi materials left in those materials explicit warnings about extraterrestrial intrusion and alien intrusion, and they saw the people of the Dead Sea cult as having fallen into the trap of certain extraterrestrial forces. So the difference that has to be really made clear, and this is clear, I think, if you read the text, is that the Gnostics, or the teachers from the mystery schools, as they should be called, the mystery schools, resisted these aliens, and they spoke of resisting them, and they spoke specifically of how to identify the alien intruders, which were of two types, a reptilian type and a gray embryo type, which are described in the Nag Hammadi text. But they warned that humanity should resist these aliens and not view them as saviors or divine beings who somehow are here to teach us or help us or save us.
So they didn't make any distinction between the so-called reptilians or the so-called grays by saying these are the good ones, these are the bad ones.
Oh, no.
They just said don't mess with them, don't have anything to do with any of them.
Right. They had a very elaborate cosmology. They had an explanation of where how the aliens, which they called archons, that was the name in the Nag Hammadi text, how they appeared in the solar system, how they arose, and they distinguished the reptilian type. They call it dracontic, which means dragon. That's the language that they use, as the kind of master race of the aliens, and the other embryonic or gray type as kind of the drones or slaves. And they distinguish these two kinds. They are described in various texts in quite a vivid manner, and they warned that humanity should not be duped by these entities. They describe them as kind of tricksters and pretenders who work on our minds and try to make us believe things that are not true and try to deceive us. And they viewed the Dead Sea cult as an unfortunate case of a group of people who fell under the spell of these trickster entities.
All right, so can you give us some longer form passages of these descriptions in the Nag Hammadi texts where they talk about them in a way which we would be able to hear more clearly that they're referring to people who are who are coming from UFOs, as opposed to, just sort of bad people or bad spirits?
Sure. Well, one thing I should make clear, which I think might be helpful to the listeners, is that today when we think about UFO contact and ET contact, we basically think of it in two ways based on the vast amount of testimony that we have. And I'm not saying you can believe or not believe that evidence, but it is evidence by the fact that it's there, and many people have made these reports. And basically it boils down to two things. It's like, you see, there's hardware, flying saucers, vehicles of some kind that are doing fantastic things in the sky and flitting in and out of the atmosphere. And the second aspect of the evidence is abductions, close encounters of the fourth kind, direct experiences of alien-type entities. Now, the interesting thing, Ian, is that whereas the Dead Sea material describes hardware, I believe, I cited you that passage, and there are other passages which talk about these shining vehicles. So there are descriptions of hardware, but not necessarily descriptions of the entities in that hardware, or of them stepping out of it and coming down and reaching people and so forth. It's more as if the Dead Sea cult had seen hardware, had seen these saucers, and built up an idea about who they were, and what they were going to do. And I would point out also something that's very important is that in the Roman world at that time and in the Middle East, there were numerous reports of UFO-type sightings. You know, Alexander the Great saw a UFO-type of vehicle. That's in his biography. And other writers of the time, historians like Livy and various pagan writers, it was a time when there was an intense amount of UFO sightings around the time of the historical Jesus. So that's important to bear in mind, that other evidence supports the fact that these flying vehicles were seen. Now, when we come to the Nag Hammadi material, it becomes extremely interesting because those reports are about close encounters with the entities. I can tell you with 100% certainty that there is no description of hardware in the Nag Hammadi material.
What do you mean by that? That there's nothing that says anything about a spaceship?
Right,
okay.
Right. There's nothing about flying ships, but there is a great deal about meeting these dracontic and gray aliens. For instance, there's a text called The Second Apocalypse of James. And I can't quote it here. Unfortunately, I'm not at home now. I'm in Massachusetts because I've come to the States for a conference, and I'm staying at a bed and breakfast here. And so I don't have this source material at hand that I could just pull off the shelf and read you a paragraph. But if your readers want to go to my website, which is called metahistory.org, metahistory like metaphysics, and you can use the search engine if you want and just put in archons or extraterrestrials, and you'll find that I do cite many of the Gnostic texts on there verbatim. I'm sorry I can't cite them for you here, but
okay.
I will assure you that you will find in the Nag Hammadi text, for instance, in the Apocalypse of St. James, it says, the archons appear, sometimes they appear 3 at a time, or they may appear in many numbers, and they will come and they steal souls by night. Now, I interpret this as a way of describing nighttime abductions. And what is really fascinating about the Nag Hammadi materials is not only that in 5 or 6 instances they describe such encounters, but they also, the authors of these documents wrote them in order to instruct people on how to handle the encounter, which is really remarkable.
So I'm at your website, and I may be able to go back and grab some of this stuff a little bit later on.
Sure. There's something called the Gnostic Catechism, and that text, if you go to the site guide and you go to the text, the Gnostic Catechism, that is the one that cites close abductions and how to deal with aliens who come and try to abduct you. Okay.
And so in talking about this, they make no distinction. Is there anything positive about these extraterrestrial contacts in the mind's eye of the purveyors, the teachers of the ancient mystery cults?
No, and it's a very important thing to point out, because you mentioned earlier, you used a phrase, something to the effect, how the ancient mystery schools, as I prefer to call them, were, because they were centers of spiritual learning, how they were influenced by this alien factor. The really fascinating thing, and the thing we need to know, is that they were not influenced. They detected it. They investigated it. They were parapsychologists, psychics, and seers who had the ability to look into these dimensions, and they came to the conclusion that there was one particular species that can intrude upon the earth, called the archons. And they didn't condemn, and they didn't say that all entities from other dimensions were evil or bad. They just identified this one particular species. It's almost like saying there are many mosquitoes in the world, right? And we know that they bite and they can be irritating. But you want to watch out for the Anopheles species because it contains malaria, and that's the one you don't want to bite you, you know? Right. So they sort of did that with aliens. They said there's this one particular strain of aliens which consists of a reptilian master type, a reptilian overlords, and a massive group, a massive population of gray embryonic drones, and that they are intruders and that they are deceivers, and that humanity needs to not be afraid of them, but we need to be aware of them, and we need to know how to resist them, because if we fall under their spell, they will take us away from our proper course of evolution. They will deviate us. I prefer to use the word that deviance rather than malevolent.
Okay, and as they're talking about this, though there isn't, as you say, there isn't anything good that can come from it. What do they think would be the bad that would come from it? How bad would things get? Are we holding off the complete takeover of the planet? What did they think? What did they think they wanted, these extraterrestrials, that we were keeping them from getting?
Very good question. You know what they say about them? It's very interesting. And again, I want to point out that those of your listeners who've read into the Nag Hammadi materials, or maybe have read some of the books interpreting them, haven't heard this, because religious scholars won't touch this material, and yet it is there. They said that these alien entities, these archons, actually cannot overpower us. They do not have the power to invade our world. In fact, they can't even exist in the terrestrial atmosphere of the Earth except for short periods of time, because it is not an environment that they can live in. They live in the solar system outside the atmosphere of the Earth. And the Gnostic and mystery teachers said that these archons envy us. They envy humanity because we have certain faculties of empathy, intelligence, and imagination that they don't have. And even though they can't actually take on our qualities and they can't steal them from us, if they kind of mess with our minds enough, they can get a sense that they are getting what we have. And I think it's very remarkable from a psychological point of view and a parapsychological point of view that the Gnostics use this word envy specifically in their analysis of these extraterrestrials, that they envy us.
Well, it's been said by a lot of psychologists that the evil always envy the good.
Well, it certainly applies in this instance, I would say, you know.
I mean,
although I would point out, too,
crimes a lot.
Yeah, I would point out, too, that the Gnostics were very subtle and sophisticated in their analysis of the archons, and they never said that the archons were really out-and-out evil. They're not depicted. When you come away from reading these materials, and you have to read them a lot in depth. I mean, I've probably read the Nag Hammadi materials 40 or 50 times and crawled through the Coptic text for years. But you come away with the impression that the Gnostic analysis of these beings was very measured and very careful. So they never said that the archons are going to overtake the earth. They never said they could destroy the human race. But they warned us about them. There is a warning about these beings. And the warning contained a very heretical and dangerous message. And that's, I believe, the reason, one of the main reasons why the Gnostics were destroyed. Because they warned us that the way that we are most vulnerable to these mind parasites, which is probably the best way to describe them, is that they would work upon us through religious ideas and religious beliefs. And by insinuating into our minds beliefs about religion and God and divinity that are incorrect, they could hamper us from realizing our own divinity. And that would be a kind of satisfaction for them. Because you know how it is, like I could say, maybe I envy my neighbor because he has a nice Porsche and he has a beautiful wife, and I can't have his Porsche and I can't have his wife, but maybe I could mess up his life in some way. And then at least I would feel a little bit more satisfied, and my envy would be placated.
And is that where you go with your feeling about how the growing Christian church comes after the mystery cults?
There's no question in my mind whatsoever, based on the textual evidence and the historical evidence, that the early Christian religion and the converts had to destroy the Gnostics. Because in the Gnostic material was a warning about Christian religion. It was a warning that the belief system that these Christians were embracing in the first centuries of our era was a delusional system. It was not good for humanity. It was not correct for our evolution and our sustainability on this planet. And so that is my explanation of why the so-called heretics had to be eliminated. It wasn't merely a matter of establishing uniform doctrines, although that figured in it, as you mentioned earlier, but it was really because the Gnostics were warning us that salvationist religion, as I call it in my book, is an alien phenomena. It's not really part of who we are. It doesn't really reflect our humanity, and it has the potential of deviating us from our innate divinity and our innate genius.
So you believe then that the archons who were unable to get through to the Gnostics, the Gnostics were able to hold them at arm's length, give them warnings, resist them, but that the disciples of Jesus, or that the growing Christian cult within in the first century within Judaism, that church, as it grew and became a separate entity, that had been manipulated by the archons.
Absolutely. I believe that, but that is not just a personal belief that is based on nothing. It is my belief based on the reading of what the Gnostics were trying to warn us about. They saw in Christian religion, and I don't mean, by the way, that they were against brotherly love or kindness or compassion. It's not that. They didn't object to the ethical aspect of Christianity. They objected to the ideological idea of salvation by an off-planet God through a son who is sent as a sacrifice. They objected to all of that because they saw that as a kind of alien implant in our minds. And I am totally convinced that that is a correct way to read the message of Gnosticism, and that is what they really believed. And I find their case very convincing.
So in this way, then, it was just the early Christianity, or Christianity as it was taking a hold of Gnosticism, but you believe really overall, if you're going with a meta-history, I can only assume you mean this overall, that Christianity is an alien-infected cult.
That's right. That's right. It's kind of like an alien virus in the human mind. But again, I want to say Christianity, and I don't want your listeners to freak out. I'm not condemning anything that's associated with Christianity that has to do with love and kindness and peace. And the Gnostics did not condemn that either. What they condemned was the belief in the off-planet God, the Father God, Jehovah, and so forth.
Okay. I got a question for you, because some of the most interesting Gnostic scholars with whom I've talked on Coast to Coast have actually made the claim that idea of the off-planet human God comes directly from the mystery cults.
That's right.
So we'll pick that up next.
Let's do that, by all means.
Next on Coast to Coast Live.
Right.
This is Ian Punnett. And thank you so much. We're talking about the ancient mystery cults. We'll get right back into the conversation with John Lamb Lash. Before we got to the break on this idea that the mystery cults, as taught in the centuries preceding the development of Christianity, but simultaneous to the ongoing tradition of Judaism, the mystery cults had resisted, as John calls it, the infection, the alien infection of belief, a kind of brain worm, a kind of virus, which would have disrupted the harmony that the mystery cults maintained. And that the early Christians, however, accepted this and were formed by the inclusion of this alien virus, a kind of, corruption, if you will, of a peaceable religion on earth. And that was the alien intention all along. We'll get back to this, because that runs in direct opposition to some of the research that we've also talked on Coast to Coast about over the years, of Gnostic scholars who say that Christianity actually stole the belief in a God-man from the mystery cults. Not that they were infected by it, but that they out and out stole it. We'll get back to that. We'll see what John Lamb Lash says next on Coast to Coast Live. This is Ian Punnett. know how you're going to get around this. I am so curious. I have been reading, of course, like many people have, the work of modern Gnostics who are quick to point out that the Jesus story, the God-man story, is too similar to get away from Osiris in Egypt, Dionysus in Greece, Syria had Adonis, Italy had Bacchus, Persia had Mithras. How do you say that this is that Christianity is like an infected alien cult when that God-man idea seems to be something that they, according to many Gnostic scholars, just flat out stole from the mystery cults?
Well, the problem here is that this comparison is not correct. It's not accurate, because the God-man of Christianity, that is Jesus Christ, is an entity that comes from out of this world into this world and is a divine incarnation. Osiris was a divinity, a God-man, if you will, but it did not come from out of this world. Dionysus did not come from out of this world.
Well, help me explain what you mean out of this world. Because I wouldn't, as a Christian, I would never say that Jesus is an extraterrestrial. I would say it is the belief is it's the divine and human. And isn't that the claim about the Osiris Dionysus cults, that they also talk about the divine and the human. The divine comes in a human form in the case of Osiris, not coming from another world or from outer space.
Yes, but the conception of human divinity in the Gnostic and pagan teachings is different from the conception of human divinity as Jesus Christ.
How's that?
Well, the conception of human divinity in the pagan teachings, such as Dionysus and Osiris, comes from a framework of animism in which the people who believed in those deities saw the divinity of the earth and of the natural world that we lived in. And they saw that divinity manifesting itself in both male and female entities, gods and goddesses. Hence, paganism was polytheism. Christianity, on the other hand, is a belief system that asserts a single and sole instance of human divinity, of a case of a male incarnation that in somehow descended or came into this world or was sent into this world by the Father God, who is an off-planet deity. And when you look at those two conceptions, you see that they're actually quite different. Okay.
I guess you do. I guess I don't, because I wouldn't use the word off-planet, because I think that God is, around the planet. It's not off-planet in that sense, but that may just be a vocabulary thing. Then how would you respond to the other Gnostic scholars who say that Christianity is simply something that originated as a Jewish adaptation of the ancient pagan mystery schools, and it got kind of kicked out of Judaism because it was too much like these mystery religions? Not that it came from invaders from another planet that were looking for some sort of a computer virus, if you will, to corrupt the Earth's program.
Right. Well, I would say I'm familiar with what you're talking about. About Freak and Gandhi and these Jesus and the Mysteries and things like this. Those scholars have a case. By the way, I don't want to come off to your listeners as some arrogant person who thinks I know better than all the other scholars. I just have my viewpoint.
Well, I get it. No,
based on on the Nag Hammadi material as I understand it. But I am very certain that I have extracted the essence of the Gnostic message, which other scholars have missed. And the reason for that is because they have a bias. They want to save Christianity. They want to hold on to Christianity. They just want to make it look different. Say, well, Christianity really grew out of paganism, and so, maybe paganism and pagan religion was something good, and Christianity just sort of took off from there. And that is not the message of the mystery schools or of the Gnostics. Their message, and this is why they were eliminated, physically murdered, and why their writings were destroyed, was no, Christianity in the form of a salvation doctrine based on a divine incarnation sent by a Father God to die for humanity is a deviation. and it is a deviation of the human species. It is a dangerous virus in our minds. And that is the Gnostic message. Whether you like it or not, whether you believe it or not, it is there in those Gospels, and I have tried to bring it out as honestly as I can.
Oh, I get that. Would it be more accurate to say not the Gnostic message, but a Gnostic message?
Yeah, this is a Gnostic message, right, that I find in the materials. Exactly, yeah.
Because in a way, I mean, I think that there's at least from what I've read anyway, there seem to be a lot more flavors to Gnosticism depending on where the region in which the mystery cult was thriving.
Right. There were many flavors. In fact, Gnosticism was extremely tolerant, and it was a wide spectrum religious phenomena. You're absolutely right about that. But I would put to you a question. Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
I would like to know, and I would ask this to Gnostic scholars now that I've finished my book and I have cogitated and digested this material. I would like to know if there was not something really dangerous and really threatening to the basic Christian beliefs, then why were centuries of violent activity devoted to not only suppressing the mysteries, destroying their temples, burning and destroying their libraries, murdering the teachings? Why was there such a violent and centuries-long campaign to wipe out and destroy the message that was in the Gnostic teachings?
Well, I think it's an excellent question. I guess in one way, I mean, I can't know because I wasn't there, but and I don't see it in the blueprint of the faith like you do. I don't see that there. It's not written that says go forward and destroy any and all competing ideas. But what I see is in the great, if you will, meta history of human nature is that those in power or those seeking power seek unity through a unified ideology. Right. And that it's much harder to bring people together and allow a great amount of diversity in terms of, to whom does one owe one's soul or one's allegiance. So that's what I always see. In a way, I've often wondered what would have happened if Christianity had come first, and as the Roman Empire grew powerful, the emperors like Constantine saw that, this new thing called the mystery religions, that gives me a new opportunity to unify everybody under my shield. And I wonder whether we would have had the same history retold again when another religion had been used by the emperors or by kings or queens or anybody as sort of a cloaking device for what they really ultimately want, which is power and control. And
right. Well, that's a very good question. And we know today that politicians and tyrants and totalitarian monsters, of which there are many on the planet, are very clever in the way that they can cloak their political ambitions in whatever you like, and especially in religious ideologies. I think it would be very unlikely, however, it would have been much harder for Constantine to use mystery and Gnostic religion to create a totalitarian system, because the essence of the mysteries and of Gnosticism is pluralism, tolerance, and a high degree of latitude for human creativity and difference of views. So it would have been rather difficult for them to adapt that system to a totalitarian program.
You may be right, but I mean, I would say the same thing exists in the blueprint of socialism.
Right.
But the real life experience that we know is that socialism while it still looked the same on paper, and you looked at the structure of the Soviet Union as, it looks very much like a, democratically represented system. Everybody, they had representation, they had this and that, they had people, but it came right down to it too was a totalitarian regime. And
that's
tyrants, here in case in communism, was a godless, political, religious political system.
Right. It was a godless religion, in a sense,
it was
paradoxically.
a godless religion,
yeah.
right? And it was also totalitarian, and it also became the excuse.
It did. That's right.
To kill and abuse and to take over and do whatever. I think that's the nature of power. I think the difference was in the earliest years, the farther back in history we go, the less able people were to be able to control massive amounts of people with whom perhaps they did not agree. And the more we had technology or communication, the more you're able to control huge groups of people. What do you think of that?
I think it's a fascinating way to look at the subject, and I certainly, don't claim to have the last word on this. But I would point out one other thing, and I make this point in my book, that the Gnostics, who were basically the deans and professors and teachers in the mystery schools, they were the spiritual educators, and they were also mystics and so forth, were non-political. They did not get involved in politics. And it's sort of like they were educators. It's as if you say, if you went to go to Harvard, and if you looked at the faculty of Harvard, the deans and the heads of the various departments, and if you regarded them as people whose role was to cultivate human potential and teach, and that they stayed out of politics. Well, I don't know today if that is in fact the case, but there was a kind of code of the mystery school teachers that they didn't get involved in politics. They didn't lend themselves to political alliances. And that's another reason why the Roman Empire, once Constantine married the church to the empire, saw fit to ally itself with the Christians and to eliminate them, because they were not helpful to the power system that was being created.
Oh, I would totally agree with you there. And I think the Christian church made a deal with the devil.
They did indeed, yeah.
But I would say that was the devil, was power and the corruption that comes from the trade-off you make when you say, well, if we want to be powerful, then we have to agree to X, Y, and Z.
Right.
And I think that is. But now, as you look at the history of Christianity and the Christian faith, do you see any other evidence of Christianity being a kind of UFO contactee cult, like you talked about the Qumran community?
Well, it seems to me that what happened, and I described this in the first part of my book in the opening chapters, I describe the Tzaddikim, that is the core of the Dead Sea cult, and then their relation to St. Paul was this really key figure, and how St. Paul was, I believe, abducted into the Tzaddikim cult. He went as a bounty hunter to search them out and eliminate them, because that's clearly what he was if you read the Acts. He was used by the Romans to go and hunt for dissident elements in society. And somehow he fell into the cult and was recruited into the cult. And then he turned around and hijacked their ideas and created Christianity out of that. And this is something that I explain in my book. Created the ideology of Christianity out of that. And so to put that in one sentence, it seems to me that the evidence says that the Tzaddikim were a UFO contact cult, and that was the larval form of what later grew into Christianity as we know it today, although it went through many metamorphoses, for instance, and many doctrinal changes. But that is the larval seed of the Christian religion as we know it, and I'm not the only scholar who maintains that view, by the way.
Okay, and so, do you see? Is there anything that I'm missing other than? And I see what you're getting at there, though, that specifies a kind of archon-like contact. Where is there anything? As you pointed out, you were seeing things in the Nag Hammadi texts,
right?
And in the that's DSS that other people weren't.
Well, there is a specific clue, and it's a spectacular clue. And I am rather astounded that it has been overlooked, and very few Christians even know about this clue. And yet, it's right in front of your eyes in the Bible, in the New Testament, in Romans, in Hebrews rather. I grew up in a small Christian community in Maine. They were very devoted people, very puritanical Bible people who relied on the Bible. And, of course, I was told that Jesus Christ was the Son of God, and he was the only begotten Son, and he came to the earth to die for the sins of humanity and all these things. And I was led to believe, as many people are, that in terms of the religious sensibility of Christians, Jesus was the supreme being, in a sense, the supreme ally, the supreme power, and behind him was the Father God. But actually, there is another entity in the story. That entity is called Melchizedek.
Okay.
And Melchizedek first appears in Genesis. He comes to Abraham. And it is actually Melchizedek who assigns Abraham his mission. And after Melchizedek meets Abraham, who was Abram, he becomes Abraham, and he becomes the founding patriarch. And as we know today, that is the patriarch of all three of the world religions.
Right.
Judaism, Islam, and Christianity.
Three of the largest ones.
Right, three of the largest ones. And there's a remarkable statement, and then he sort of disappears. But he is described later on. He comes up, and he is connected with the Zedekim cult. In fact, Melchizedek, this mysterious, eerie kind of entity, was the central figure and the highest authority to the Dead Sea cult as well. Now, the really fascinating thing is that in Hebrews, chapter 6, I believe, when Paul is elaborating his idea of the Christ and so forth, he makes the remarkable statement that the Christ is a priest after the order of Melchizedek. And that means that Melchizedek is the hidden power behind Christ, and that is the archon or alien power.
That's the archon or alien power, all right? And not an angelic...
Not at all.
Representative of God.
No, a creature of wrath and envy.
Okay. Then we'll come back to this, and we'll give the numbers coming up next. The mystery cults were in its purest form tied to the earth in a way in which Christianity wasn't, never would be, but would be a corrupting virus to the mystery cults. That is what John Lamb Lash is saying. We'll get back to your questions and comments in this conversation next hour on Coast to Coast Live.